What's up, YouTube? Welcome to the Sandwich Shop. I am Hoagie, and this is your Overwatch 2 Overwatch League news show. We cover all things Overwatch League news. We got a couple stories on the docket for us this week. Obviously, we're in the off season. It's slow, so we're kind of hunting around, right? We're scavenging the internet for stories to talk about. I think we have some interesting ones today. We're going to talk about what went wrong with Overwatch League. We're going to talk about really quickly just about Bischu coming back to the Houston staff, and then we're going to finish up by talking about how do you fix Mercy. Big discussion going on in the community right now amongst a lot of people, and it's an important question. We're going to talk about why it's an important question and propose some possible changes that might be able to help balance around Mercy a little bit better. But I'm excited. Hope you're excited. Let's get into the show. First story on the list, we have this little article from Wired.com, which I think is very interesting. This is from Will Bedingfield over at Wired. We'll link this in the description below as well. It says it's titled "The Overwatch League Ruled Esports, Then Everything Went Wrong." Now we're gonna get into the article, and a lot of times, and I don't know how it works at Wired, a lot of times like the person that wrote the article might not necessarily be the person that titled the article. But I've got to say this just off the bat. I don't think there was any point where the Overwatch League ruled esports. Like, even at the height of, like, 2018, 2019, Overwatch World Cup, like, I wouldn't say it, like, ruled to me it says, like, it dominated. Like, it was the premier esport, right? But, like, League has been massive. I don't think Overwatch League ever eclipsed like the viewership of League of Legends. When was the Fortnite World Cup? Fortnite World Cup. Now this is interesting because they just announced that they've got a $10 million circuit coming. So Fortnite was 2019, and this event was insane. Both from like a viewership perspective, a production perspective, a prize pool perspective, and like a national moment perspective, right? Because Booga won this, and Booga was like on Good Morning America the next fucking morning talking about like being this 16-year-old that just won this insane prize pool at the Fortnite World Cup, right? So, you know, like I think not to tear the article down before we even get into it, I just think the idea that the Overwatch League ruled esports is a bit of an overstatement. Now, that's not to change some of the stuff that's listed in here. We're going to read chunks of this and kind of respond as we go through, right? So, again, shout out to Will Bedingfield. Great article. I've got some criticisms of it that we'll get to, but yeah, let's get into it. It says, since its formation in 2017, the Overwatch League, the professional esports program for Activision Blizzard's Overwatch hero shooter, has drawn frequent comparisons to traditional sports institutions. Its stated aim, as Wired put it in 2017, feature was to become the new U.S. National Football League. I'm curious who said this. I don't remember this. Also, before we get into that, let me come over here. Shout out to NYYB7773, our newest subscriber over here at the Sandwich Shop on the YouTube, !YouTube in the chat if you're hanging out on Twitch. And said, cool video, dude. Really enjoy your content. Just please switch to dark mode. Now, everything that has an option for dark mode, I select dark mode, right? So, you know, we're on Twitter and we've got dark mode. We are on, let's see, what else? We're on YouTube. We've got dark mode. The problem is that you have to have an extension to make docs dark mode, as far as I know. We finally got it, boys and girls. It is on dark mode. So again, shout outs to NYYB7773 for the comment. Also, guys, if you're watching this and you've got thoughts on what I'm talking about, when I say comment on the video, it's because I want to pull it up on stream and talk about it. Like, let's have a conversation. So if you're watching over on YouTube, drop a comment, and next episode of the Sandwich Shop, we'll talk about it. All right. enough of that. Who compared them to the NFL? Let's just make this quick. All right. Okay. Conflict also had. Okay. Here we go. Perhaps the most high-profile executive recruit for Overwatch League is Steve Bornstein, one of the early architects of ESPN and a former president of ABC Sports. He left his most recent job as CEO of the NFL Network to become Blizzard's esports chair. When asked why he made the change, and this is all talked about again in the most recent article. This one's from 2017. When I left the NFL, the only thing I saw that had the potential to be as big was the esports space. What fascinated me was just the level of engagement, the fact that we measure consumption in billions of minutes consumed. Okay, so NFL. That's the last mention of NFL. Like, at no point, this is funny because it takes the concept of this article that says, like, okay, before football, we'll see. We'll make sure they never said like National Football League, right? So they took the concept of like just him being from the NFL and saying that if he's going to leave the NFL, the only thing he wanted to do was get into esports because he saw that there was a potential there. To make the leap to just say like, oh, their aim was to make it the new U.S. National Football League. Like, I don't know. I don't get that, at least from what was said in the articles. But I think obviously, early Overwatch League had a very traditional sports structure, right? You had your divisions, while you had stages and stage playoffs, you were working towards a greater playoff. I don't know if you guys remember, but the first season of Overwatch League, the playoffs were series, and that series would span multiple nights. So, like, you'd have like the Glads versus the Spitfire, and if the Spitfire won the first night, it was a best of 3 series. So you'd play the first of 3 game or matches within the series, and then the next night you would play. So like playoffs were a little inflated and bloated, but they were more structured like NBA playoffs, right? Where you can drop a set, but you have a chance to come back from that. Honestly, I think some of that was kind of cool, and I think a lot of people's criticism was like, this isn't how it's done in esports, and we need to bring it back to what it looks like in esports. And while I think like it's a valid criticism to some extent, I wish like the Overwatch League would have experimented a little more with like, what are some of these traditional sports elements that we can bring into ours, and not just, I feel like they pulled the ripcord on the parachute a little early on some of the more like traditional sports things that they that they tried to achieve. So the two institutions certainly overlap. The Overwatch League was the first major esports league to franchise local teams in major cities, and it features live spectator events with hometown crowds and salaried athletes. The goal was to offer esports fans a more traditional sports model where they could go to a local arena or venue, see their hometown team play against an away team, and cheer during the event. And the model offered local pop-up stores, team merchandise, ticket sales, media rights, and licensing. This is the quotes that we just read. When I left the NFL, the only thing I saw that had the potential to be as big was the esports space, which I guess you could say like, okay, they thought it was. I don't think that they were saying like Overwatch League specifically is as big as the NFL. It was just like esports in general is as big as the NFL. But I think even for this former NFL Network executive, right, who came over to Blizzard to be an esports chair, like, that's a false equivalence to say like, okay, you're measuring this in billions of hours watched or whatever, right? That's across all of esports. That would be like saying, I'm going to invest in this organized dodgeball league because when I look at hours watched of sports, it's in the billions of hours. And it's like, yeah, dodgeball is a sport. Sports are watched for billions of hours collectively, but most of the watched hours in sports are from the NFL, the NBA, the MLB, the NHL, like the major 4 in the US, right? So like to say that like, oh, I saw the numbers of the aggregate viewership in esports in the billions, and that's where I saw the potential. Like, obviously that's where a lot of investment dollars came from. Back in the day, it was like the potential of esports and what was going to be that esport that hit and caught on and converted billions of gamers into billions of viewers, right? But I don't even think Steve Bornstein looked at the Overwatch League and thought this is going to be the next NFL specifically. I think he thought esports is popular. There's a space to be carved out here. But anyway, no more potent symbol of the league's ambition existed than the plans for a Philadelphia Fusion Stadium, a $50 million, 65,000 square foot, 3,500 seat arena projected to turn Philadelphia into an esports town. We're going to come back to some of the criticisms that they have over physical locations, right? Because there's kind of something that happened in the middle of the birth of Overwatch League, in those first few fledgling years. That's really important for us to talk about, and they do mention it a little bit. But anyway, as Cecilia D'Anastasio recently revealed to Bloomberg, Activision Blizzard enticed team buyers with a projected league revenue of $125 million by 2020. This money is not materialized. Though buoyed by the release of Overwatch 2 and the beginning of a new season of the Overwatch League, viewership has dwindled. Overwatch League 2022 Summer Showdown, for example, was less popular than the two previous years' events, according to esports charts, with just 51,000 peak viewers, particularly grating when you consider franchise owners pay upwards of $20 million to license a team. Okay. I think this paragraph right here is not conflating, right? I think it is failing to represent the nuance of what happens with the Overwatch League and esports in general and the world in general, right? So $125 million of revenue by 2020, right? So when Activision, and look, that number may have been a fantasy regardless of the outcome and the way that things went, but 2017, the Activision Blizzard esports people are going to NFL franchise owners, venture capitalists, communication companies like Comcast who own the Philadelphia Fusion, right? And they're saying, look, here's our 5-year plan. The first year, we're going to have X amount of teams. We're all going to be based in LA. We're going to have, this crazy, traditional sports kind of schedule. We're going to create a really great live competitive environment for the people. We're going to blow out the production on the stage for these 2 years, get fandom for your teams that are representing your cities while you guys work on plans, securing facilities or building facilities, because we're taking the show on the road 2 years into our plan. And by 2020, you guys are going to be able to generate some sort of merchandising revenue, ticketing revenue, concessions revenue, all sponsorships and partnerships revenue, all of those kinds of things once we take this show on the road. And you guys at your home events might not own the entire thing, right? But there's going to be revenue stream opportunities when we do that. Again, $125 million, probably a fantasy regardless, but to compare where we are now versus what was being pitched in 2017, when Overwatch was about to crest that hill and start to really realize the vision that it had for itself, a global pandemic hits. Do you guys remember the first homestands of Overwatch League, in 2020? Where was the first one? Let's see. Overwatch League 2020 Week 1. This is playoffs. I don't want playoffs. This is opening weekend. It was in Dallas. Look at how fucking packed this arena is. Right? Am I unplugging this? What's going on here? You guys can... Oh, there it is. This audience was crazy. This audience was huge. It was engaged. It was hopping, right? And not that every single Overwatch League weekend might look like this, but you expand this over, multiple weeks throughout the season, and you can start to see the value of it, right? And they started to pivot to like homestand weekends in 2020, but the idea was like, we're going to travel to each of these teams' home markets, and there are going to be opportunities for teams to generate revenue within their own markets. And so as Overwatch was starting to realize that vision, the pandemic comes in, shuts it down. They're switching to all remote broadcast. Within that, like it not to mention, we had like the GOATS meta and stuff like that were kind of wild. And so, I think like it's a little bit, it lacks the nuance to say like, oh, they had this 125 million and I'm sure when the pandemic hit, the projections and the understanding of the vision of the league was starting to change at that point. And I'm sure that was I'm not sure it was being communicated. You never know if it's being communicated, right? But to be like, well, we went from here and then now we're here with dwindling viewership. It's being buoyed by the release of Overwatch 2, the beginning of a new Overwatch League season, which is weird because we're still like months away from the beginning of an Overwatch League season, right? Like to forget the nuance of what happened between the original vision and where we ended up in 2022, I think is a little, I don't want to say disingenuous because that sounds accusatory, but like it just lacks the level of storytelling to really understand what went wrong with the Overwatch League. Now, look, was the model that they were trying to adopt perfect? Absolutely not. And I would say nothing has perfected its model in the first 5 years. The NFL is in what? Like it's 50 or, close to its 60th season. We're about to, we're coming up on Super Bowl 60 or whatever. And it's like, they're still making changes to the format. We're adding a game. We're adding more playoff teams. We're changing up our rules. We're thinking about expanding our league to London, to Mexico City, to like these things operate like living organisms. They're constantly growing, constantly evolving, and they're constantly having to evolve and change with the situations that are coming into the world. So, do I think that had the 2020 season been able to happen, that they would have just continued to follow through on even like the homestand model and all that? No. They would have made adjustments and they would have pivoted, but they were forced to make rapid adjustments, rapid pivoting. And, as a result, here we are in 2022, right? Then we get into some actual meat of the conversation with this next, like questionable moves, like switching the Overwatch League's primary broadcast medium from Amazon-owned Twitch to the most popular site on the web for live stream game content to YouTube in early 2020 have driven viewers away. Shortly after that move, COVID-19 shut down the live event, in-person events, and tournaments that gave the league life, along with the international travel that players relied on to get quickly from their hometowns to matches. And then on top of all of that, allegations of abuse and harassment inside Activision Blizzard led gamers, advertisers, and sponsors to abandon the game, forcing the company to scale back some of its growth ambitions. Okay, now we're starting to get into the meat. Let's talk about these three things kind of in sequence, right? So the first is they move their entire broadcast over from Twitch to YouTube. They enter an exclusive partnership with YouTube. And that was not just a broadcasting deal for the Overwatch League. From what I understand is that move also, obviously they brought over the Call of Duty League, but I think there was also a portion of that deal that was like related to like hosting servers that they weren't going to use AWS. They were going to move over to like Google platforms to like support the online infrastructures of their games. So it was a bigger deal than just the esports aspect of it, right? But I think like in terms of just the Overwatch League itself, it's one of the more negative things that the league has ever done, because in moving to YouTube came with all sorts of promises that never became like fully realized, right? Like, oh, we're going to move over to YouTube. We're going to have 4K 60 FPS broadcast available. And that is not something that we can currently achieve on Twitch, was like something that they said. I think we got like a few weeks of 4K broadcast and then it went back to 1080p. I think the encoding on the YouTube videos is like totally sucks. And even to this day, totally sucks. And it gets really blurry on the live broadcast during, like heavy action. And then it's that exact VOD that's like being transferred over to the, just the YouTube page to watch it afterwards. And it's like, there were quality things with it. There's a familiarity with Twitch, and it's also just like, I think if like the NFL, right, were to say, it's like if the NFL said, we know that right now we have deals with Fox and CBS and ESPN and NBC to broadcast these games. People know where to go to find it. On Sunday at 5 o'clock or Pacific or 8 o'clock Eastern, right? I can tune into NBC during the season. There's going to be a Sunday night game. I know that when I turn on my TV at 1 o'clock, I can look at either CBS or Fox or both, and I know I'm going to see an NFL game during the regular season. We actually saw this with the move over to Thursday Night Football from NFL Network to Amazon. So Amazon TNF viewership. I saw an article about this the other day where it was that it had gone significantly down. Down 41% from 2021. So Thursday Night Football moving from, and look, there's like a paywall in front of it, right? You have to be an Amazon Prime subscriber, but even before, like if you were going to watch them on NFL Network or whatever, you'd have to be a subscriber to NFL Network. And so moving from one platform to another is always going to be destabilizing for your viewership. And if the NFL can't weather that without dropping 41% of viewership from platform to platform, for the Overwatch League to think we can make that move as well from Twitch to YouTube without a massive drop off in how many people are tuning in to watch, I think was a little like ill conceived. The concept itself, right? So yes, I think that move was questionable. I also think Twitch is like endemic in the esports space. It's a quintessential part of the esports zeitgeist. I have the ability, like very rarely have I, and I've watched a lot of, I actively keep up with the Overwatch League, obviously, right? So like I will know that Overwatch League's about to start. I will go to their YouTube page. I am the kind of guy who knows that noon rolls around during Overwatch League season. I'm going to type in youtube.com/Overwatch League and I'm going to be able to see it, right? I am not the person that like this criticism is levied against, right? This criticism is levied against people who like followed Overwatch League on Twitch during something cool that they were doing. And then every time they get on Twitch now, in their following page, which is shown by viewership number, they're regularly reminded that the Overwatch League is live when they open up Twitch to watch live streams. And to spend 2 years building an audience on Twitch and then expecting them all to migrate when you had, like, what was the viewership? Twitch viewership, Overwatch League Season 2 finals. So that would be 2019. So and this isn't all Twitch, right? But it drew 1.12 million average viewers, up 16% from the previous year. Counts viewers on digital platforms such as Twitch, as well as the ABC broadcast, and the data counts live and first 24-hour rebroadcast viewing, right? Let's see. So, okay. I doubt a ton of people were watching on ABC broadcast, right? So let's just say, peak Twitch viewership, and it may be further down in here, right? Let's say peak Twitch viewership, 800,000. And let's say of that 800,000, a quarter of them are following the page. So 200,000 people, follow the Overwatch League Twitch page. I'm just making up numbers for the sake of the argument that I'm making, right? That's 200,000 people that every time they open up Twitch during season 3 could have seen Overwatch League live and tuned back in. But the second that you take the last game of the 2019 season, broadcasting on Twitch, drawing huge numbers, and then expect people to tune into the first games of the 2020 season over on YouTube, the fall off is going to be outrageous, right? The NFL saw 40% fall off in that, and there are far more people actively keeping up game to game with what's going on in the NFL than people are in Overwatch League. And so I'm sure I can find those numbers, but the viewership drop off was probably immense when moving to YouTube. So, like, from a company standpoint, for Activision Blizzard, there may have been a great deal of benefit with the other, like, server side and infrastructure things that they were going to get as a result of working with Google and YouTube. But for the product of the Overwatch League, it really fucked them over, right? Secondly, COVID-19 shut down the live in-person events, right? So, that video that we had just pulled up from on YouTube. This was streamed 2 years ago. Where's the actual date? On February 8th, 2020, right? So the pandemic hit a month after the season opening weekend for the Dallas Fuel in Dallas, right? And so pandemic hits, it derails all of that sort of stuff. And I'm sure there was a ton of money that was lost off of pre-planning for these events, booking vendors, secure it for teams that were like securing those locations. There was probably a lot of dollars lost there that were never recouped, and that there wasn't like an infrastructure in place with the league to be able to help like make the owners of these teams whole from the money that they had invested in the live viewership experience. So, like, could there have been worse timing for and look, in the grand scheme of things, right? Like, all of this is minor. But in just talking about esports, like, could there have been worse timing for the Overwatch League? Like, could you have your opening weekend event on February 8th? So February 8th, I moved to California in March. I was here for 5 days. Right at the beginning of March is when I got to California. I was here for 5 days before the world shut down because of the pandemic. It was March 9th. California shut everything down. So almost a month to the day from their opening weekend, the world shuts down. Could there have been worse timing, right? Like, the YouTube, and then compound that with the loss of viewership on YouTube. Like, it was all very poor timing, and the league doesn't have control over that stuff, right? The league doesn't have control over the pandemic, obviously, and how that works. Like, and the league doesn't have control over owners losing money by investing in event planning for something that never came. The league doesn't have control over international player travel logistics in these like over the top special circumstances with COVID, right? So like it was a snowball effect of these things, and then the allegations of abuse and harassment, and then the sponsors abandoning the league. I'm trying to keep my timeline straight here. This was 2021. This was 2 years ago. Coca-Cola backed out. Kellogg, State Farm, T-Mobile, like all of those companies who had been staples within the league. We had like the Cheez-It Crunch Time moment or whatever. The company paused their sponsorship. I don't know if they ever picked it back up. Like, obviously this is something that Activision Blizzard can control. And in a time where you don't have time, like you don't have the bandwidth to fuck up. Not that this is ever acceptable, right? But like, you really fuck up when the things outside of your control have already fucked up your plans. And I'm sure that after the loss of all that money following COVID-19, owners were a little gun shy to want to jump back into it. And I think it's probably going to take a couple of years for owners to want to do that stuff. And it looks like Overwatch is probably going to adopt a massive, like, continue to adopt an overwhelmingly online presence for their league, and format for their league. I wish, and we've talked about this already in the first two episodes, like, I wish they would split themselves out into regions, and it would work more like League of Legends, where it's like APAC region's going to compete amongst themselves, have their own season. We're going to invest more in Europe. There was a story earlier about like a Japanese esports org wanting to get into Overwatch. Like invest in all of these other regions, and then collectively come together once a year to compete. And then we can maybe even get back to trying to realize some of the original vision for the Overwatch League. And I know this is, at this point, this is fantasy wishful thinking for me too, right? But like, if we have just like a North American division, it makes travel so much simpler. Like you're not having to get visas for guys to go work in Europe and in Asia. Like you can just focus on making sure they can compete in Mexico, the USA, and Canada. Leagues all around know how to do that already. Like the logistics of that aren't impossible. And you can maybe start to go back a little bit to homestands. Things would greatly have to change with the management of Overwatch League and the viewership of Overwatch League to make that work. But losing sponsors after all of that, due to things that were completely within your control as a company, and still not necessarily like making the moves needed to rectify said fuck ups, like I don't know. I think the Overwatch League is going to regularly have issues regaining sponsors. And then teams are going to have issue regaining sponsors, right? All right, let's keep going. In 2023, the league's path to profitability is unclear. Pessimism is compounded by this uncertain future. Yada yada. Okay, the Microsoft acquisition. The latest development in this saga is the rebranding of the Philadelphia Fusion, one of the league's more popular teams, to the Seoul Infernal. The team will relocate and become the second Seoul-based team alongside the existing Seoul Dynasty. I'm not going to relitigate everything that we talked about on Monday about the Seoul about the Seoul Infernal, but I think this is less about the trajectory of the league. I mean, it could be, right? But I think it's also more about just like Comcast stepping back and being like, wait, we've competed in Korea since the pandemic started. We have esports infrastructure in Korea to support the team that we are building. Yes, like the stadium abandonment is always going to stand as like this constant reminder of what could have been. But I don't think this is necessarily like doom and gloom of the league. I think it's just like, hey, if we want our organization to be stable at this time, like we should move them to South Korea. And like, I don't know, this seems like a very North American focused aspect of this article, where it's like, well, if they're not willing to invest in NA, it's clearly failing. And it's like, this sentence shows that it's failing in comparison to the original vision. But this as a whole, like, given the circumstances of the league since the pandemic, like, this isn't a failure of the league. This just makes sense, right? I don't know. These troubles come during an economic downturn and a dampening of esports hype. And yes, this is true. And we see this ebb and flow in esports where, there's a lot of this, like they mentioned, growth before profit model, where it's like, hey, this thing is exploding. How do we monetize it? How do we convert viewership? How do we, how do we get in on the ground floor so that we can become endemic in this space, right? And so, that this is an ebb and flow. This is not just an uncertainty for the Overwatch League. This is being felt ripple effect that like 100 Thieves isn't even involved in the Overwatch League. And yeah, so like this is an industry issue, not necessarily an Overwatch issue. Let's see. There's some like I think there's just some weird quotes from some like quote unquote research experts in here. But the problem is not financial; it's conceptual. In global esports transformation of cultural perceptions of competitive gaming, Rory K. Summerly points out that easy comparison between sports and traditional sports like NBA and NFL are misleading. Esports currently have more in common with late sports, as he terms them. The most successful of these being the X Games and UFC, and these are just lucky survivors. Now, those are things that all like X Games when I was a kid. And growing up in the 90s and in early 2000s, like everyone my age wanted to be like a fucking skateboarder or like a BMX rider or ride dirt bikes or some shit, right? And so like the X Games capitalized on what was hitting with the youth. Similarly to the UFC, like when I was in college and stuff, like fighting sports, boxing was it kind of lived its heyday. A lot of corruption in boxing gave way to people who were like itching for a combat sport. The UFC came in. It was brutal. It was brutal while also being technical and deep, and there was a lot of nuance and understanding, and so like people heavily invested in that, right? But the quote goes, in comparing esports to traditional sports, there's a risk of making natural equivalences that fail to look at the history of similar endeavors. Esports are unusually unstable compared to other sports and still command only a relatively niche audience, even among people who regularly play or watch video games. And this is more of a problem with kind of the structuring, I think, of amateur esports. And I think there's multiple other quotes throughout here that we'll talk about. And this is one that I wanted to bring up. So this is hold on, let me make sure. Yeah, Carol Severin, senior analyst and co-founder of Medea Research. This was her quote. If esports is going to remain about esports, it's only ever going to appeal to the small segment of consumers. He argued that like Riot Games, like with KDA, the virtual K-pop, like drawing in millions of views. Like, I think this is a false equivalence that like, oh, this is what's propping up their competitive gaming. And it's like, I think KDA is, they use League of Legends and Valorant esports to prop up KDA, but KDA draws interest from League fans at large, even if they aren't necessarily into the competitive scene. So anyway, I want to talk about this sentence, and I want to talk about what we were talking about, the quote up here about esports are unusually unstable and relatively niche. So I've said this a lot in the past. If you guys ever were listeners of Player 3 podcast, if you guys ever listen to PVA radio, if you ever watched my old can't remember what my nightly gaming show was, but I would talk a lot about how it's really hard to understand. People look at esports and they say, damn, it's really hard to understand. It's really hard to understand what's going on in Overwatch. There's like all these flashing lights. There's all these meters and stuff that are like moving up and down, and there's all these different characters, and it's like, how can you ever get into this if you just how do you ever know what's going on, right? And I think like to an extent that's true. The visuals of video games are very overwhelming. They're very difficult to, and can make it difficult to keep up with. But let's look at this. Let's look at a football broadcast. Let's see if one of these pulls up let's see. Let's find a good example here. Okay. This is fine. This is fine. What is going on? Why is my internet being fucky? It's going to take me to a full-size image. Sorry. I know watching my screen load is very enthralling. My internet's been kind of shit lately. Okay. So this is the picture. This is the image. It's still not getting any bigger. All right. So I look at this, right? What do I have to understand here? Okay. There's a lot of things. There's a lot of information that I have to gather when watching this to truly understand to even basically understand what's going on, right? Forget like the objective, forget the rules, forget all of that, right? Like when I'm just looking at this, there's a lot of information that I have to take in. All right. So Kansas City, Philadelphia, obviously those are the teams. These are the scores, 3-0. Okay. What are these? All right, those are timeouts. This it's the first quarter, right? This is the amount of time that's left. This little 25, what's that? That's the play clock. 1st and 10. What does that mean? Well, you get 4 downs to make 10 yards, and if you don't get 10 yards within those 4 downs, the other team gets the ball. Okay, there's this little dot right here. What does that mean? Okay, that means that Philadelphia is in possession of the ball. Okay, who's who? All right, there's other information I have to process. What's this blue line? This is the line of scrimmage. There, a bunch of things happen. Everybody on both sides has to be lined up on their respective side of the line of scrimmage. If the quarterback wants to pass the ball forward, he can't be beyond this line. Multiple other rules that pertain to that little blue line. Okay, what's this yellow line? That's the first down line. That's showing the line that this team that has the ball has to cross in order to reset the first down so that they can continue their drive, right? All of that is stuff I've got to be able to like visually process just when I turn on this game. This is all pre-snap, right? There's a ton of stuff that happens when the ball snapped that I have to be able to understand. First of all, none of the 5 guys on this line right here eligible to catch a pass. Why is that? Well, eligibility, ways that you're lined up, all of those sorts of things, right? Like, there's a bunch of strategy stuff that the defense is going to do. There's things as far as like the objective of scoring a touchdown that I have to understand. And like, it's impossible to keep up with, right? Like if it's my first time watching football and I turn this on and it's my first experience of football, I'm not going to know what's going on. Let's take another example. I know nothing about rugby. I don't know a single rule about rugby except you score some points if you cross a certain line, right? But I don't know, like, when you go to a scrum, I don't know when you, like, I know you can only lateral the ball, things like that. I've tried to tune into, like, a rugby game when watching the Olympics. I don't have a fucking clue what's going on. And I would say all of these games are just as niche, quote unquote, as esports. But the difference is we gain an exposure to football at a very early age in multiple ways. Number one, football as an institution has been around for a century, right? So my father, my grandfather might be football fans. My mother, my aunt, my uncle might be football fans. And so I'm ushered into the world of football generationally in a lot of ways, right? And I don't particularly remember the instance where I learned where all of this stuff means. I just kind of picked it up by osmosis as a result of being regularly and constantly exposed to it. The second thing is there are millions of youth in America who participate in football at varying levels. And what the NFL has tried to do is expand their initiatives in Pop Warner football, in flag football, in these youth sports, because they understand if we can get kids to understand what's happening here from an early age, regardless of whether they continue to play it, they may still have an interest in consuming it, in being a fan of it. Esports don't have that kind of intentional structure that, while it can continue to be niche in the sense that if an outsider were just to stumble upon this, they're not going to know what's going on. If somebody who's never seen football stumbles on a football broadcast, they're not going to stick around very long to figure out what's going on, right? And so I think like if esports want to succeed, and this is beyond Overwatch, this is, League, this is Rocket League, this is Smash esports, this is Smite, it's all of those things. You have to figure out a way to introduce people to these games at a young enough age that they begin to understand it, appreciate the competitive nature of it. I used to golf a lot. I golfed, I was like this is going to sound swankier than it actually was. I was a member, right, at a little like podunk 18-hole public golf course out in Virginia. I'd play it 3-4 times a week. I sucked. I got at my best. I could shoot like in the mid 80s. So I was not good, right? But what it did was it gave me an appreciation for the talent needed to play on the PGA Tour. And so when I would tune into the PGA Tour and realize like, oh shit, these guys can like, they can hit a fucking dime from 125 yards out. Like, you know, they can hit a 3x3 square from 250 yards out. Like, I started to relate to that. I started to understand the skill that it took, right? All because I became exposed to the difficulty, to the challenge of it, right? Similarly to football, like I played middle school tackle football for a year. Did not enjoy actually playing it. Love watching football still, right? Like, and I have a great appreciation for the physical giftedness that it requires to be good at it. Esports is the same way. Like, even if look, only a small percentage of kids are ever going to advance competitively enough to participate in any way that's going to be life-changing for them, in the sense of like, I'm going to get a free education by getting a scholarship, or I'm going to go pro in this thing. Even for the kids that don't reach that, though, they can become acquainted with the product of competitive esports and maintain an interest in watching and keeping up with it, right? And so I think companies that have tried to monopolize amateur and youth esports are really damaging the scene, because while they say that they are trying to make it more accessible, I think that esports to an extent can be so grassroots at those smaller levels that you kind of stymie the growth by saying, well, you got to work with us if you want to have an esport, right? And so I think League of Legends, I think Overwatch League, I think these games would benefit greatly from, if they really have an interest in long-term success, investing in high school esports, collegiate esports, giving people an avenue to see it. Like, I don't think just playing the game competitively online is enough to get you to understand and appreciate what competitive gameplay looks like, right? And what esports at its highest can bring. So it's niche until it's not, right? Like, and it's niche relative to whatever you're comparing it to, right? But basketball is the same way. It's difficult to understand. There are memes about how difficult the rules of baseball are to understand and get. And so, look, I have a lot of problems with this article. I don't think Overwatch League ever ruled esports. I think what went wrong is that at the precipice, like at the pinnacle of the realization of their vision for it, there was a global pandemic that fucked everything up. And I think even if Overwatch League weathers all of that, comes out stronger on the other side and starts to pivot into maybe a more traditional esports model, I don't think we can chalk up the failure necessarily to the ambitious model that it came in with. And I think as a result, Overwatch League in its original 2017, 2018 vision is always going to be one of the greatest what ifs. And to me, it's always going to be one of the most heartbreaking what ifs. We went back and we watched Overwatch World Cup 2019 on stream. I want to go back and watch more Overwatch World Cup 2018 because I remember it being hype as fuck. I look back on the grand finals in New York in season 1 and how hype that was, the size of the crowds, right? And I just think, like, what could have been if they would have had the time and the global circumstances to realize their vision, to learn the hard lessons that they were clearly going to have to learn with, like, the stress of international travel for 6 months or whatever, make the changes that they had to make to try to hone in their original vision. It's always going to be one of those great what ifs, and I'm sad that we're never going to know, right? Makes it sound like Overwatch is dead. I clearly don't think that, but yeah. All right, let's move on. We spent a ton of time on that article. Definitely interested in hearing you guys' thoughts about what you think has gone wrong, and let me know your alternate reality. My alternate reality looks like this. They have the 2020 season. They do the homestands. They do the travel schedule, right? And they start to realize, like, okay, This isn't going to work. Sending teams to different arenas to play every single game that they need to play, right? In like telling guys like, okay, now you're just going to live in Asia for 6 weeks if you're North American based, or you're going to live in North America for 6 weeks if you're Asia based. Like, they were going to realize that was going to be taxing for their players. And so I think they would have either pivoted to a more regional model that culminates in once a year the regions playing against one another, or they were going to switch to the homestands, where hey, like, we're gonna have 8 teams, and maybe do it like once a month. Like 8 teams are gonna travel to this place to play in this home market. So I think those would have been the ways that they'd have pivoted, and I think it would have been great. And I think we're gonna. I hope that the league hasn't moved on from aspects of the grand vision, right? But a lot of stuff has to start going right. I think moving back to Twitch is a bigger deal than a lot of people think. So, all right, please welcome back Bischu. This is from the Outlaws Twitter account. As our team manager of operations and coaching. This is how light we are on news. We're fucking talking about Bischu team manager hire, right? Following statement was released today by Bischu through his personnel self and Michael Shadow White, general manager of the Houston Outlaws, located in Houston, Texas. I'm back. I love Bischu. I miss seeing Bischu competing. Welcome back. Also, just want to point out how fucking hilarious. I thought this was a joke, honestly. And if I'm HEB, I'm maybe taking some of this to heart. Like, for HEB's logo to be bigger than the Outlaws logo on this, or is that part of the joke? Am I missing part of the joke here? Maybe I'm missing the joke. Call me out in the comments if I'm missing the joke. I'm happy for you to call me out. All right. Next story. Next thing I want to talk about. The thing everyone's talking about. Mercy. And what makes Mercy so hard to fucking balance. All right. Computer's struggling today, boys and girls. Not wanting to load shit. One of these days, it will load. Guys, we spent like an hour talking about what went wrong with the Overwatch League. Talking about that article. Okay, let's try refreshing. I don't know why my computer's internet is being so lame. Ba-da-ba-ba-ba. I'm loving it. Not a sponsor. Yo, this is fucked. Is it this extension fucking shit up? It was just about to load before I fucked it up, wasn't it? Oh, okay, here we go. You can sit here, this is from SK. She says, you can sit here and say, Mercy isn't the problem all day, but does anyone have fun playing against Pharah Mercy? What about Mercy Echo, Mercy Widow, Mercy Sojourn? What about when she resurrects an effective 1,000 HP tank after your team commits? It's not an attack on Mercy players, no other hero mains to get so offended, yada yada. Of course, Sojourn and Echo are problematic, but not nearly as problematic as when they're pocketed. The problem is with Mercy, as she is now, Blizzard has an impossible job with balancing DPS characters. Yes, guys. Mercy is an insanely challenging character to balance around because you have to think about your heroes in 2 states. Your DPS heroes in 2 states, right? And the greater distance you give them on their abilities, or the greater escapability that you give them within their abilities, the harder I believe it is to balance when Mercy, as she exists currently in the game, exists. Like, Sojourn was meta for so long, not necessarily because of the strength of Sojourn, but because of the strength of her secondary fire while being pocketed. And so, if you nerf her overall damage numbers for her secondary fire, she as a character becomes weaker and more unplayable without a pocket. And so you're constantly having to take like the damage boost from Mercy into account, right? And and so that and we've seen this with Pharah, like Pharah Mercy. There's been times in the meta where that's been insanely oppressive, and you end up not being able to really tweak the numbers for Mercy, because, but rather you start tweaking the numbers for the damage that's coming from the DPS itself, right? And I wish I should have done a little more research to see like what some of the like. What if some of the Pharah nerfs looked like over time? I know she's had like a jetpack nerf, but I'm sure she's also had like damage numbers adjusted, because she can easily escape. She can easily keep the Mercy safe and out of sight. Sojourn can attack from a distance. She can escape really easily. Your Ashe, your Widow can put out damage from a distance, and your Mercy can stay relatively safe as well, right? And so, like, what we need to think about right now is like, I thought I paid for fucking Pro to be able to use the whiteboard. Okay, we're gonna do this. Let's do a black screen. So let's think about like possible adjustments to Mercy that can help, so that you're not having to constantly do the reverse of power creep for your DPS heroes, because you're trying to balance them in two states, right? So let's see if I can just make this large. Black screen wallpapers. Sorry guys, I know this is fascinating shit to watch. Let's just open this image. Guys, I've never used a computer before, if you can't tell. Okay, we're going to do it like this. All right, so what are some ways that we can balance Mercy? The first thing that we can do is we can put damage boost on cooldown, right? Think like Moira. Like that she can only expend her damage boost for a certain amount before she has to perform some action to recharge it, whether that's healing multiple teammates, healing a certain amount for teammates, and as she heals, she recharges her ability to damage boost or something like that. And then you just have to scale it, right? So you have to think about the characters that she's pocketing. So all the characters she's pocketing are going to be like 250 HP, 250 HP damage heroes, right? And so like the scale of seconds per damage boost restored for amount healed per like over time has to scale appropriately, right? And you can give it some sort of like Moira minor recharge creep like passive, but put damage boost on some sort of cooldown. I think that would be appropriate. I think you could also turn damage boost into a cooldown where it's not necessarily a beam, but more like, I don't know if it's like a field where, hey, maybe she can drop a damage boost field down, and the character has to stay within that field in order to get the benefits of it. And so then you can have some different you can have different play styles, right? Like maybe a Mercy can get up and brawl because there's going to be like a death ball of characters around where she can drop a damage boost field that's only a certain size, but it's easy to retreat from, so that like those brawl characters can't get on top of you, or it's easy to push like a far away Widow or a far away Ashe out of that damage boost field in order to get them to get off of to get out of it. It'd be easier to push that. It would be less oppressive, right? So I think these are two really good. I think you could also like change it to, again, like maybe like a mini like, and maybe this is taking it too far, but like give it like a mini nano ability. Like she beams the character. That character gets damage boosted for X amount of seconds, and then after that's off, it goes on cooldown. But then you could maybe even program it to where like that interacts with like the opponent Kiriko, right? So like, okay, she gives a mini nano on that's not an ultimate. Like obviously, I don't think you would want like Moira's nano, not Moira. I'm sorry, Anna's nano to be like totally negated by a Kiriko. So just do this for something like Mercy, right? Where if she damage boosts one of her teammates, it's a shorter cooldown that can be cleansed by Kiriko, right? So in the same way that like if you're bioed by Anna and you can cleanse your teammate, it can also cleanse it off of the opposing team. I think that could also be an interesting dynamic. Like I think damage boost is a cool ability. I just don't think it should be fully and freely accessible to a Mercy player at any given time, right? Because, and I think all of these things, it's like you wouldn't have to think as much when balancing like the actual damage numbers for your DPS characters and thinking about like, okay, well, if we do this, what does that actually make it if she's being pocketed by a Mercy? And if we're thinking about range, like how does that change when it's being pocketed by a Mercy? You know, the other simple things is like, hey, it has to be direct line of sight, you know, like it can't be around a corner. You know, I think there are other things that you could do that would be smaller, like tweaks, but these are more like reworks, right? That I think you could do. So that's just my opinion on Mercy. I'm not a Mercy player, and you know, like SK said, a lot of Mercy players get kind of upset when you start talking about how you want to tweak their characters or whatever. But I think, you know, if you want to make DPS balancing more stable, you've got to figure out. You've got to figure out the Mercy. You've got to figure out Mercy damage boost. You know, and let's actually read all of what SK said here. It's not an attack on Mercy players. No other hero main gets so offended when you say their hero is problematic. Her abilities need to change without making her unfun to play, and she should be a good hero that's always playable, just like every other hero. Obviously, the goal of balancing is to make every hero at any given time viable. That's really hard to do. More impossible to do the more characters that you have in a game, obviously, right? Because Sojourn and Echo are problematic, but not nearly as problematic as when they're pocketed. The problem is with Mercy, as she is now, Blizzard has an impossible job of balancing DPS characters and constantly has to think how Mercy will affect them when they buff/nerf them. If your response is just kill Mercy and skill issue, please take a moment to think about why I'm top 500 on all roles and you've never played past Diamond, which I think, you know, great roast. And it's like it's a conversation worth having because I think it's always going to be a balancing problem. So those are my recommendations. Like, give it some sort of recharge cooldown or recharge mechanic, like Moira's heal. Turn it into a field, or turn it into like a mini nano, and then the bonus is that it could be, you know, just like easily cleansed by Kiriko, or something like that. So, all right, that's gonna do it for the sandwich shop. And it's going to do it for me this week. I appreciate you guys tuning in on YouTube. Let me know what you think about any of the stories that we talked about. If you want to write 6 paragraphs about Bischu coming back to be the team manager for the Houston Outlaws, let's do it. All right. We're going to be back Monday, though. Hopefully you guys have a long weekend that you're going to enjoy. I know I am. And we'll talk again next week over on YouTube. Thank you. Bye.